Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's your boy Jamal. I hope you guys are all doing well, and welcome to the first episode of my brand new podcast called Drivin and Survivin. I got to give a quick shout out to my boy Ryan on Instagram at Kutch_media for the name, but it is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a show about cars and life, driving and surviving. And the reason I'm starting it is because I myself enjoy podcasts a lot. I listen to them while I'm driving. I listen to them while I'm working. I listen to them while I'm working out. And it's a cool way for me to kind of share some personal insight into my life or into things that are happening around the world. And just kind of a way for me to hop on here weekly and just talk to the camera. Because sometimes, even though I've been doing this for 5 years now, I still feel like there's a little bit of awkwardness between me and the camera. And this is kind of a way to get on here and talk for hours on end. Just get more comfortable with you guys, right? Share some personal stories, maybe bring occasional guests on to talk about things that they got going on, things that I have going on in my life. And I feel like it's a really cool way for me to connect with my audience. I want to make it interactive as well. I want to have you guys send in videos, send in audio, or send in just text questions that you guys can ask. I'll feature you on the podcast. We'll play your video or we'll play your audio clip asking your question, and we'll just kind of get into things, right? So I've written down some things here that I want to talk about. For first episode is going to be about how I got into cars, but I kind of wanted to touch base on a few things about this podcast, right? So as I mentioned, it's going to be a weekly show. I'm aiming for 45 minutes. And the first few episodes are definitely going to be rough, boys, so you just got to hang in there with me. But I'm aiming for 45 minutes. It could be a little bit shy of that. It could definitely go over that, but I want to at least at a minimum have these episodes be 45 minutes. And as I mentioned, I want to open up a bit more, share some personal stories, opinions I might have, some hot takes about things going on, or other kind of videos floating around out there, stuff that go viral. I want to definitely react to some of those kinds of things, right? And then as I also mentioned, it's an opportunity to talk about current events and just get better about speaking on camera, right? And just talking to the camera, getting better about trying to stop rambling so much in videos, which I feel like I'm doing right now, actually. But anyways, and then also occasional guests, right? So I want to bring some of my buddies on from the car scene here local to DFW, Texas, which is where I'm from, Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. Bring some people on that I've met over the years, people that are kind of big in the local car community. And then also maybe have some people zoom in from other places. I've got some YouTuber buddies as well. I was on Yellow Vet 04's podcast a while ago, and I feel like we could definitely zoom some people in and talk about just things that they got going on, things that might be interesting to my audience. So as I also mentioned, I want to make this an interactive podcast, guys. So I'll pop it up on the bottom of the screen, but I want you guys to send in video questions, audio questions, text questions if you want. Send them to the email address jamals.garage@gmail.com, all lowercase, no apostrophe S, jamals.garage@gmail.com for your chance to be featured on the weekly episodes. And so one of the last things I wanted to touch on before I got into the episode was where does everyone kind of consume these shows at, right? So my biggest audience is on YouTube, so obviously it's going to be YouTube first. I want to keep the video aspect of it and keep uploading it on my main channel. I don't think I want to start another channel just because this channel isn't big enough to warrant me starting another channel specifically for podcasts, right? So I'm going to keep the video episodes here, but do you guys also consume podcasts on iTunes and Spotify? I could look into figuring out how to upload there. So definitely just drop a comment below if you guys would like to see them on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Spotify as well. For those of you guys that don't care so much about video, I guess I could also try to upload it there. So with all of that out of the way, I kind of wanted to spend episode 1 going over the story of how I got into cars. And basically, to make a long story long, it's the whole point of podcasting, right? I want to go into a lot of detail about kind of how I got into it, because I think it's pretty interesting with my background specifically of how I got into cars. So let's go ahead and get into the episode here. I'm looking at my bullet points. Before I get into it, I just got to give a huge shout out to the Dallas Mavericks. I feel like it's a current event. I got to talk about it. My Dallas Mavericks are in the playoffs. Game 1 was last night. Game 2 is tomorrow night. I'm filming this on Thursday, May 19th. So we finally made it to the Western Conference Finals. We lost game one, but we're looking to bounce back in game two against Steph Curry and those Golden State Warriors. So that's kind of my current event of the day, right? So here we go. Talking about my early life, right? So one thing you guys got to understand about me was as a kid growing up, I was never really around cool cars much, right? So both my parents moved here to America, to Texas in the early 80s, right? I think my dad moved in like 84. My mom came later, like later 88, 80s, somewhere around that. I should know these things are going to kill me and that I don't know them. But anyways, they moved here in the 80s, right? And I was born in kind of the mid 90s, 1994. I'm 27 years old. And I was a first generation American, right? So right off the bat, my parents didn't even have cars in Pakistan, right? So they got here. And the earliest memory I have of cars is my mom had a Mazda Protege. I think it was like a 1991. I didn't know it was a Mazda Protege at the time, but I kind of later realized it. And coincidentally, the only memory I really have of that car was getting rear-ended at an intersection. So it's kind of the only way I kind of remember that car. I remember I had a bottle of Coke and I got rear-ended and it spilled all over me. And then kind of the first car that I remember my dad having was a 1994 Honda Accord, and actually was a 5-speed. So that was kind of the first time I saw a manual transmission, which kind of ties into something that we'll talk about later. But I remember my dad, he had bought this brand new 1994 Accord. It was a 5-speed. It was like a dark green color. I'll try to pop a picture up if I can find one. But that was kind of his first car, right? And so, for those of you guys that know, brown families, I'm Pakistani, so Indian, brown, Desi families, right? For some reason, the whole stereotype is that we only drive Hondas and Toyotas. And the stereotype exists for a reason because it's true, right? Like, even right now, my parents have like 4 Toyotas and my sister drives a Honda. And it's always been the case that, Beta, you need a very reliable car. You have to drive a Honda or Toyota. It's just been ingrained in them that these are kind of the most reliable cars. And they hold their value and they'll go forever, and there's very low maintenance cost on them, right? So that's kind of the main thing that your family will always tell you, and they always told me growing up, right? So for me to now have American cars and love kind of that American cars, big V8s, loud, fast, whatever, is very opposite of how you think I would have been raised, right? So everyone in the family, as I mentioned, drove a Honda or a Toyota. It's like Camrys and Accords. It's all it was. Actually, if you're rich, it was Camrys and Accords. If you're kind of normal, it was like Corollas and Civics. Those were kind of the cars that everybody had. So I was never around cool cars. And I do remember, though, that I had a Hot Wheel collection. I had this blue plastic box. There's a bunch of slots in it. I think it must have held about 40 cars, probably less now that I think about it, but I feel like back then it was a lot. It was this little blue plastic suitcase looking thing, and I had my Hot Wheel collection in there. I tried to fill every hole in that box or every spot in that box. So that was kind of my first experience with just trying to learn about cars, I guess. Obviously, I didn't know what they were at the time, but I did play a lot with them. And then also, I remember in elementary school, a lot of you guys will kind of know where I'm coming from here. We used to have those scholastic book fairs. If you guys remember, 90s kids will definitely remember. We had those book fairs come through it was like a week out of every school year. They'd come to the library, and they'd set these showcases up, and you'd go look. And one of the main sections in that book fair that I always remember was the poster section, right? There's always a section of posters, and I remember the posters were kind of like the most relatively inexpensive things that were at the book fair. So obviously those are like the only things that I ever kind of got because growing up we didn't have a whole lot of money. I remember I was on like a reduced lunch discount program. My parents were never always the richest, but I will say they did provide for me, and I was able to live, relatively comfortably. But we were not rich by any means. Definitely were not rich by any means, but I do remember those posters were around like $5, and I specifically remember this green Lamborghini poster. It was a green Murcielago poster that would come to the book fair. I remember I saw it one year and I was like, oh, it's a really cool poster. I didn't get it that year, and then the next year they came, I ended up getting that poster. Right, it was a green Lamborghini Murcielago, and I think at that time that Lamborghini had just kind of come out, so that was kind of my poster car, if you will, and it was kind of the first time I had put a name to one of these crazy cars because for the longest time you would just see them and you'd have no idea what they were. And at that time, I was just like, oh, cool, a Lamborghini. Like, you never really knew what model the cars were. It was just like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. It's like, oh, one day I want to grow up and drive a Lamborghini. And then going along with that, we used to always we were really big into like art and drawing in elementary school. I remember I had this one friend. His name was Ignacio. I have no idea where he is now, but him and I were always like drawing in class, right? The teacher would be talking, we wouldn't be paying any attention. We had these little sketchbooks and we'd be drawing. And the main things that I ever drew were like either Yu-Gi-Oh characters or cars. And I remember Ignacio was real big into like lowriders and stuff. For some reason, so we were always drawing like lowriders and like we were like drawing them, hitting jumps with the. I remember Ignacio had this crazy picture. As a lowrider like hitting the hydraulics, I guess, because I remember like springs, and then it was like a big ruler almost next to the car with like the height meter next to it. Something tells me that Ignacio had kind of been to these things before, lowrider bouncing competitions or whatever. But I remember drawing those, and then I remember drawing Lamborghinis because there was like one book at the library that I would check out, and it was when the Murcielago came out, and it was like a book about Lamborghinis, and there was a yellow Murcielago in there, so I would check that book out and literally just set it on my desk and then look at it and try to draw what I saw. So I don't even know if I have those drawings. It'd be awesome if I could find those, but yeah, we would draw cars all the time, and that's kind of how I got into cars. And thinking about it now, it's kind of weird because I have a little brother that's he's almost 20, and he's not really into cars nearly as much as I was or I am. So I don't know what it was, just the influences around me. But yeah, I was really into cars at that age. I would draw them, and then also we would have these car shows that would happen at my high school in the summertime. I never knew when they occurred, but I remember driving by all the time, and anytime we saw them out there, it was like a classic car show. Like I'd tell my mom hey mom, pull in real quick. I want to go check out the cars. And back then I would always go look at the cars. I had no idea what I was looking at. It was a bunch of classic cars, and I always thought, whatever, dude, these cars are kind of lame. I was always looking for like the modern cars. There was this guy that would always bring like Chargers with like Lambo doors on them, and I was like, oh dude, that's the coolest car ever, dude. That thing's probably like $1 million or whatever, right? So those car shows are kind of the earliest memories that I have. And then finally, I remember there was magazines at Walmart that I would look at. I think kind of the two magazines that I would look at when I was little was like, I think it was called D Sport. It always had like a Supra or like a Skyline on it. And so I would just, my mom would take us to Walmart. She'd obviously do all the shopping. And as soon as I walked through the door, I would just take off like a bat out of hell and go to the magazine section, just look at magazines the whole time until eventually she'd call me over the intercom, have one of the employees call, Jamal, can you come to the front, please? And then I'd hear it, put the magazine down and go. But yeah, it was like D Sport, I think was one of the magazines. It was like a JDM magazine. So it was either I would always remember seeing like a MK4 Supra or like some kind of a Skyline on the front. And I would just kind of flip through the pages. I had no idea what I was looking at, but I'd kind of look at those magazines. And then the other one that was kind of like my exotic car magazine was DuPont Registry. Maybe you guys have heard of them. It's kind of like a car catalog for like super high-end cars. So at that time, I'd flip through DuPont, and there'd be like Murcielagos in there. And then I remember like as we got kind of later into middle school, I remember seeing like the Reventon, which was kind of that V12 Lamborghini between the Murcielago and the Aventador. And that to me was always like the coolest car. I think one of my first like wallpapers on my desktop was a Reventon. But yeah, so that's kind of the story of how I started kind of gravitating towards cars, right? My love for cars kind of came from there, because obviously like I wasn't ever around in these cars. Like my parents weren't really into. my parents didn't really care much for cars. They just wanted something that was fuel efficient and reliable, hence the Hondas and Toyotas, because that's kind of what they were known for. And like back in like the back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, American cars didn't really have the best reputation for like reliability and like, interiors being like nice and stuff. Or so I was told, right? That's kind of what I was told when I was little. It's like, oh no, American cars are unreliable and they break down, their interiors fall apart, and so on and so forth. So really, all my uncles and aunts and my parents were just like Hondas and Toyotas for life, right? And it was like Corollas and Civics at that. Like my dad had that Accord, and I remember he was super proud of it. And then I think when he ended up selling the Accord, we got like a 1998 Toyota Corolla. I think my dad bought it used in 1999, and it had like 5,000 miles on it at the time. And coincidentally, that 1999 when he bought that Corolla, we still have that Corolla to this day. Granted, the transmission went out in it last year, but it's still sitting out in front of the house, and it's actually the car I learned how to drive in. So that's kind of how the early life went, right? So transitioning to high school, what are we at for time? Oh, we're only 16 minutes into it. Awesome. So that's where my love came from. And then middle school, your focuses kind of shift. I went through puberty. I wasn't so crazy about cars then. I got into like I remember I was like skateboarding, and then we were playing football and stuff like that, and just kind of had other distractions. But it really was like back in high school when you start thinking about getting your license that I kind of started getting back into it, right? So I remember in high school, I was kind of the late bloomer. I didn't get my license till I was about 17, and by that time, I think pretty much everybody in my grade had already got their license. So I know my best friend Casey, who plays kind of a huge role in my life and influenced a lot of the decisions I made, including picking up the camera and just filming things, right? So that the whole love of like filming and like YouTubing came about the time in like late middle school to early high school, because if you guys remember, obviously Call of Duty was like the biggest thing in my childhood. Call of Duty 4, MW2, those were huge, right? But I remember there was a channel called Freddie Wong. If you guys know Corridor Digital, they made this whole video series. It was like a live action Call of Duty almost. I remember Casey and I watched it and we're like, yo, dude, that's dope. Like, we should try to make a short film. This was before we could even drive. And so we started like collecting cameras. I remember my first camera was like this crappy $30 like blue plastic camera from Walmart. I think it filmed in like 360p, but it was cool because a little USB thing popped out the top of it and you could plug it into your computer directly. And so that's kind of how we got into video editing. And then my first video editing software, I think, was like Windows Media Player or like Sony Vegas that I allegedly pirated, that I would edit videos on. And I actually think I remember like making like Yu-Gi-Oh videos at first. But anyways, that's kind of how we got into filming videos. So it was like that camera, and then I graduated to like a Kodak. There's also the Flip Minnow back in the day, which was real big. And then we eventually worked our way up to like Canon DSLRs. Like I had a T2i, which was kind of like my first big boy camera that I got in high school. It was kind of like my first step into like the love of photography and the love of video making. And so that all coincidentally happened around the same time of me like learning how to drive. So naturally, the only thing I would film or video, or that what I would video or take pictures of, were cars, because obviously I had my car, my buddy's cars. We got real big into it. So Casey played a huge role in my life, not only with cars but cameras. And so going back to it, when I was 17, I finally did get my permit, and eventually did end up getting my license. As I mentioned, that 1998 Corolla that my dad still has, was the car that I learned to drive in. And I remember going around the block for the first time in that car. I thought it was the fastest car ever. Like when you're a kid and you hop in a car, you start driving it, and it was front wheel drive, right? So I don't know if anyone will relate to this, but like I'd hit the gas and like because it was front wheel drive, it kind of pull you along instead of kind of push you like a rear wheel drive car would. So I remember just tapping the gas and the car like took off to like I don't know maybe 25 miles an hour, and I was like, whoa, dude, that was like way too fast, right? And truth be told, my dad didn't always have the most patience, so him teaching me to drive was definitely a trip. I remember like day one, he yelled at me so bad, and I was like, dude, I've never drove a car before, but that was kind of like, I don't know. He always, my dad's very competitive in nature, so when he was teaching me how to drive, obviously he's a bit of a hothead, I guess, right? So I remember taking it around the neighborhood. And I thought it was the fastest thing ever. Just learning how to signal. I mean, the car's not nice by any means, but and then I remember like explicitly like trying to make a U-turn in the street, and I had to like I almost hit the curb and I had to stop and back up, and there was a car coming the other way, and then I had to get going real quick, and my dad got so mad at me. He's like, "Get out!" He's like, "Get out! Let me show you how to do it." And then he got in and he does it perfectly. He's been driving for like 20 years at that point. He just does it perfectly right, and he's like, "That's how you do it." I was like, "Yeah, no shit, Dad. You've been doing it for 20 years." He just expects me to be a master in day one, right? So that's kind of the memory that sticks out to me about learning how to drive, and I still give my dad shit about it to this day. I'm like, "Hey, Dad, remember when I almost hit that curb and you got really mad at me?" And we just laugh about it now, but that's kind of how I learned to drive. My older sister did like a driving school, but I was kind of the next person up in my family to get my license, and I did parent taught because it was a lot cheaper, to be honest. And so I had my dad kind of teach me how to drive, and then there was a period of time after I got my license while I was working on like a Saturday or Sunday. I work weekends at Albertsons. For those of you guys that don't know, Albertsons is like a grocery store. I was like a bagger, and the baggers are also the janitors there, but whatever. But that was kind of the first job I had, and I would work weekends, Saturday and Sunday, and that was kind of my opportunity to drive my car, because obviously I couldn't drive it during the week because of school and stuff. So when I had my permit, I would drive my car to work, and my dad would drive it back. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but I remember allegedly there was a short period of time there where my dad was like, I allegedly don't want to go with you to work today, so just take the car and don't wreck it, while I had just my permit. So there was a period of time where I was allegedly driving with just my permit, right, folks? So I'm watching what I say here because, anyway, so back to where I was before. I kind of went off on a tangent again. So Casey and I, obviously, huge role in my life. And then also, like, the craziest thing to me is there's people that, another tangent here, people that tell me that, they don't keep friends in their lives for long, but we are completely the opposite. Like, the same core group of like 5 or 6 friends I have are the same guys that I've been friends with since literally like first, second, third grade. And so a lot of these guys played a huge role in my life. So Casey's parents had actually got an Infiniti G35, and that was kind of the first fast car that I had ever ridden in, right? So I remember Casey had pulled up, or he called me one day. This was when he had got his license. He got his license on his 16th birthday, so he had his license before me. I didn't get mine until I was like mid-17, I think. And he called me. He was like, "Yo, what are you doing?" I was like, "I'm just chilling at the house." He's like, "All right, walk outside in like 5 minutes." So I walk outside, and he pulls up in this like blue Infiniti G35 sedan. And I was like, "What the heck, dude?" He's like, "Yo, my parents just copped this thing." I was like, "No way." He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hop in real quick." So we hopped in, and we went down to a closed course where nobody was at, allegedly. And he turned the traction control off. And that was the first time I'd even heard of traction control. It was like, "Yo, I turned the traction control off." I was like, "What does that even mean?" Anyway, so we're sitting there, and the road surface is like asphalt. It's kind of like, it's not like concrete. It's like that slippery, like gravelly asphalt. If you guys know what I'm talking about, it's kind of the more slippery road surface as compared to concrete. Definitely not something that you want to race on if you make any type of horsepower, but I remember the 280 horsepower of that Infiniti G35 sedan was enough to kind of spin the back tires a little bit. So it spun just a little bit, and then we took off. And that was the first time in my life that I think I had ever like consciously experienced real wheel drive or like wheel slippage at all. Like I was like, holy crap, that was insane. That was the craziest thing I had ever experienced. The way it pushed you back in your seat was just crazy. The speed of it, I think the G35, well, I don't think, I know the G35 had a VQ35DE, which is the same engine that Nissan put in the 350Z that Nissan put in the 350Z. This is a DE model, not the HR model, but whatever. Anyways, that was like the fastest car I had ever been in. 280 horsepower felt like a rocket ship to me, and why wouldn't it, right? Because up until that point, I was just riding around in my parents' Corolla and my mom's Sienna, which the Sienna made like, I don't know, 150 horsepower, and the Corolla had like 80 horsepower at that time. So this Infiniti literally doubled the amount of horsepower that I'd ever experienced. And then also, first rear-wheel drive car experience. I get the whole sensation of like the back end slipping, like scared the crap out of me. And then also like just wheel slip, right? And like I had never experienced more than like zero point 0.1 G's ever in my life, because Lord knows my mom is a very careful driver, as are most moms. So that to me just blew my mind. And I was like, dude, it would be so crazy if I could ever get a car like this. Like that's kind of where my headspace was at, right? So that experience, honestly, probably changed my life forever. And Casey's probably the main reason that I spend all my money on cars. We just went on an innocent little car ride one day, and that changed my life forever. So I'm sure a lot of you guys probably have a story where there was one car or one ride that kind of changed your whole outlook on how you viewed cars. So that to me was really like, dude, like I've kind of been thinking about what I had wanted to get for a first car at that point, but that G35 was like, yo, dude, that's crazy, because it has a 350Z engine in it, but it's like a luxury sedan, right? So hopefully, like when it comes time to put insurance on a car, it wouldn't be too bad, right? So that's kind of where my headspace was at. I was like, dude, it would be awesome to get a G35 as my first car, because that's a pretty nice car to have as a high schooler. So I started to kind of save my money from that point on. I saved for a year. My parents would not. I remember for the longest time they wouldn't let me get my license for some reason. My mom's always been like super protective, and she's like, "Why do you want a license? Like you're still in high school. Like you ride the bus to school. You don't need a car right now. You can get one when you get to college." But I was really persistent. I was like, "Mom, why can't I have my license? You know, I just want my car. I'll just drive it to work, whatever. I won't even drive my car to school." And for the longest time, I didn't. I had a car, but I would just ride the bus to school because she wouldn't let me drive it, right? But anyways, that's kind of where we're at now, right? So I started saving my money after I owned that car. I had, no expectation of getting anything like that. Like I was thinking, again, beta, you want a Corolla or a Honda Civic? That's kind of where I was at, right? So I was kind of thinking I would end up in one of those things. So I was saving my money, and so the time finally came when I went ahead and bought the parent taught course. As I previously mentioned, my dad kind of taught me how to drive, and I finally got my permit when I turned 17, like 2-3 months after I turned 17. And while I had my permit, I was like driving my dad's Corolla around, and I started looking at cars that I could potentially get. And my dad had told me, he's like, "How much money do you have?" And at that time I had saved, I worked 3 days a week. It was like Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. And I made like minimum wage, which then was $7.25, and I think coincidentally is still $7.25. But I made like $7.25 an hour. I would eat 2 Taco Bell burritos on my lunch break to save as much money as possible. I remember the 2 Taco Bell burritos, cheese, bean, and rice. They were $1 each, so that was only $2.16 on my break for lunch every day. So I was spending about $5 every weekend and saving the rest of the money. So at that point in time, I had saved up $2,200, right? So I was like, okay, I got $2,200. And I asked my dad, I was like, "Dad, do you think that you could help me pay for my first car?" He's like, "Oh, sure. How much do you have?" I was like, I have $2,200. He's like, tell you what. He's like, I'll match what you have. So, $2,200 plus his match of $2,200 put me in like the $4,400 range. And I thought maybe he'll throw in an extra 100 and I can swing for $4,500. So I started looking around at things that, at cars that I would be interested in, right? So started with the Corollas and the Civics, and even then, dude, they were kind of expensive, and like I ended up in a pretty crappy one. But that's kind of where my headspace was at. I remember I also worked at this like used car lot over one summer, and I rode in a Cavalier, and I thought they looked pretty cool. I was like, yo, like what if maybe I get a Cavalier, which that was like a thought I had for like 2 weeks. I really didn't even look seriously at them. But I think that's funny because I ended up eventually having a Cavalier as a daily in college, but that's jumping ahead again. So I remember I had $4,400 to spend, and I really loved Casey's Infinity, and I was like, dude, what if, you know how you always go on Cars.com or Zillow and you look at houses or cars that you can't afford? So I was doing that one day, and I was looking at Infinity G35s. I was looking at sedans specifically, and I remember this one popped up at Grand Prairie Ford. It was a 2005 Infinity G35X sedan. It looked exactly the same as Casey's car did, and I was like, and it was pretty high mileage. I think at the time it had, I think it was 159,000 miles, and I think they were asking like $8,800 for it, and so I was like, oh, dude, no way I'd be able to afford that. But I showed it to my dad anyways, and I was like, yo, Dad, these cars are pretty sweet. I was like, Casey's parents just bought one. I rode in it. It was like the craziest thing ever. And he's like, oh, really? He's like, it's way too expensive. I was like, yeah, I know. It's like double what I can afford. He's like, yeah. He's like, you know what? You want to just go look at it, though? He's like, you just go see it. I was like, don't really know what the point is of that. But sure, let's go check it out, right? So we went up there. They had the car. The salesman was super chill. He let me drive it. And I was just like wondering the whole time. I was like, why does my dad even let me drive this car? It's like, maybe we'll just go look at a different car here that they might have on the dealership. But we saw that car, he let me drive it, and then we come back to the dealership and we get out, and the salesman's just staying there smoking a cigarette, and he goes, what do you think? And I was like, oh, it's really nice, dude. I wish I could afford it. I wish I could have this car, but it's probably too nice for me. I was like, thanks for letting me drive it, though. It was really kind of a dream come true at the time. And my dad turns to the guy and he's like, would you guys take $7,500 for it? And then I looked at my dad. I was like, wait a second, Dad, you just throw an offer on this car? I didn't think that we were going to spend that much money. He's like, I'm just going to see what they say. Like, I lowballed them. There's no way they're going to take the offer. And they're like, $7,500? And my dad was like, yeah. I'm like, okay, let's come inside and see what we can do. And we started walking inside, and I was like, no way this is about to happen. Like, my heart started racing a little bit. And we walked inside the dealership. I remember the that salesman that was working with us was super chill. And then you know how car sales go, right? I could do a whole episode. In fact, I am going to do a whole episode on like the business of car dealerships and how slimy some of them can get. But we walked inside, and the salesman was super chill. He's like, I gotta let you talk to my boss. So then they send out one guy. He's not even the boss. He's just like a different guy. He tries to get my dad to come up. He's like, what about $8,000? My dad's like, nope, we're not doing $8,000. He's like, dude, $8,000. He's like, what about $7,900? My dad's like, no, we're not doing $7,900. He's like, dude, you just come up here to try to upsell me? My dad started getting a little bit pissed. Like, that was my dad's strategy, right? He would like, anytime he would like negotiate, he would like walk out the dealership in like in hopes that they'd come like chasing him to try to make the deal. Because that's kind of how he had got my mom's car, the Sienna that we have at the time. But he thought it was like this god tier strategy, and honestly, it did work that day. So that guy leaves, and then a different guy comes, and he tries to upsell us again. And by that time, my dad's getting real mad. He's like, no. He's like, never mind. We're not doing this. I'm done. So he starts walking out. He walks out the dealership, and like I'm like, oh, I kind of knew it was gonna happen. I was like, there's no way I was gonna get that car. So I walk out behind him, and then the original salesman comes out chasing us. He's like, hey, what happened, man? He's like, calm down. He's like, we're just trying to make a deal here. And he starts sweet talking my dad, and I was like, dude, your guys in there are just messing around. He's like, they're trying to get me to buy this car or pay this much for it. I didn't even want the car originally, and I'm like, whoa, Dad, easy. He's like, we're trying to get the car, and so he's like, we didn't even want this car originally or whatever. And the salesman's like, I'll tell you what, $7,500 cash money. He's like, we'll do it. So we walked back in, And I'm dude, by that point I'm like through the roof. But don't get your hopes up till the keys are in your hand. So we walk inside, and then one other guy comes out. It's finally the dude's manager. We had to go through like three different guys to like get to the final boss, who's like the actual manager. And he's like, I can't do $7,500. He's like, but listen to me. My dad was about to walk out again. He's like, I can do $7,700. Like, that's as low as we can go for the car. And my dad thought about it for a little bit, and I looked at him, and he's like, how much money do you have? I was like, I only have $2,200. He's like, he looked back at the guy, and he looked at me, and I mean, he, to this day, I remember that day so vividly. He's like, you know what, we'll take it. And I was like, holy crap, it was insane. He's like, Jamal, he's like, give me all your money right now. So I gave him the check that I had for $2,200, and he's like, and then he basically that day he bought that car. But I remember we had both driven up there, and I only had my permit at the time, so I couldn't drive the car back. So he's like, all right, I'll come get the car tomorrow. So we left the dealership. I was riding home with my dad. I was super ecstatic, dude. I was so happy. I couldn't contain myself. But my dad had just spent like a significant chunk of money. So when he does that, he's not always in the best mood. So I just kind of had to contain myself. I was like, holy crap, I just got that car. Holy crap, I just got that car. But, I was just like, my dad's like, it's a really nice car. It's like, you have to take really good care of it. And I was like, yes, dad. Like, I understand. The entire time I'm thinking in my head, like that burnout that Casey did in his Infinity. I'm like, yo, dude, that's going to be sick, dude. And more on that later, because I didn't realize the X meant, well, I did realize the X meant all-wheel drive, but I didn't realize that with only 280 horsepower, all-wheel drive car is not going to do any burnout. So anyways, we get home and I go to school the next day, and I get back home and the car's there. My dad had took my nephew up there to, my nephew gave him a ride, and my dad drove the car back home. And I remember getting home, and my dad was like, I should not have bought you that car. And I was like, why? What'd you do? He's like, I just put my foot down a little bit on the way home. He's like, that's way too fast for you. And then I was like, and I just started cheesing. I was like, heck yeah, dude, let's go, baby. And so that was my first car. It was a 2005 gray Infiniti G35X. And boy, the amount of money I dumped into that car. I think I ended up spending like $8,000 or $9,000 in mods, which I have this common theme of just spending more money than I paid for a car in mods. And at that time, you have to remember, it's not like the current market that we live in right now, right? Cars didn't appreciate. Cars depreciated as soon as you drove it off the lot, and they depreciated even more when you started putting high schooler mods on them, right? So I remember I had test pipes on it. It was catless. I had an intake on it, a Stillen intake. That was actually my first modification, a Stillen cold air intake. $250, and that was kind of the first modification that started my addiction. That's kind of how I got bit by the mod bug, right? That started my addiction into car modifications. So I had a Stillen intake, and then I also had like a plenum spacer, which for those of you guys that know Infinities and Nissan 350Zs and stuff, you'll know what it is. But it's like basically like a paper spacer or like a cardboard spacer for like the plenum. So it isolates the metal from each other. So it stays cooler, and the idea was to keep your air intake temps lower. So that plenum spacer, and I had a catback. It was a Tanabe medallion catback, which was actually a really nice catback for that car. It looked like a big muffler on the back though. All my buddies called it a fart cannon, but it was actually like, I feel like it was kind of a respectable exhaust at that time. It wasn't like a Resonator Delete that just sounded like complete garbage. Even though if I heard it now, I'd probably say it was like super like rice and sounded terrible. But I had that Tanabe medallion, and then I also had a Cobb access port that I bought off the forums. Cobb used to make these access ports that had like preloaded tunes in them. There was like a stage 1 and a stage 2, and like I remember like I had got the plenum spacer, and I could finally bump up to that stage 3 tune in the Cobb and load it onto the car. They were just like pre-made maps, and honestly, like I don't even know if it made the car faster. But yeah, that was kind of where I was at. I had all those mods, and then I also put Vogue Racing 2-piece wheels on it. Vogue Racing, there's like a legit forged wheel, and it's kind of started this whole thing of like, fake parts versus real parts or whatever. And then I also lowered it on BC Racing coilovers. So, I mean, if you think about it, compared to what the kids are doing now with G35s, I feel like I had a pretty respectable build. BC Racing, Vogue Racing, Tanabe, Cobb, like I had legit parts on the thing, but it was still slower than Christmas, dude. I remember with all that, I did all that, right? And then by that point, Casey's parents had upgraded their Infinity. They had bought like an '08 G35, which is the HR motor. And I remember like I was like, dude, sick car, but that's stock. Like my Infinity, still take it. I was like, I know it's a HR, whatever. And I remember we raced, and my full bolt on Infinity with like $8,000 worth of mods still lost to Casey's dad's G35 that was an HR motor that he probably paid $8,000 for, and I still lost to him, and it was just the most demoralizing thing ever. But it was like close enough for me to be like, I think I edged you out, and I just never told him. And in fact, I never really told him how much that crushed me. But he'll know now watching this episode. So that was kind of the story of my very first car, right? And I think we're like 40 minutes now. So yeah, I mean, that period of time was kind of the most fun that we had, because I remember Casey had his FJ Cruiser. Tristan, my other buddy, which by the way, backstory on Tristan, he had a cousin that would like track his car here locally at MSR Crescent. He was like a big Porsche guy, and Tristan had like a Miata. I remember his parents had this NC Miata. It was black convertible, manual, and he kind of gave me my first true manual driving lesson. And I remember that car was kind of my second experience to manual. And up until that point, my parents had always told me like, don't get a manual car. Your dad had a manual car. He hated it. He would stall it out, all this, and that. And like manual cars were like the worst thing you could ever do. Like, why would you even want to shift your gears manually? But Tristan kind of taught me how cool they could be, right? Like doing the clutch kicks and like just driving, shifting gears. It just was like, it made you feel more connected to the car. And so that's kind of when manuals started to like shift in opinion for me. I was like, you know what? It actually would be cool to have a manual car. And they're really not that bad if you know what you're doing. And then also my boy Rylan, he had a 1994 Jeep Cherokee that was a manual. And he really taught me how to drive it. Like he let me drive his Jeep on multiple occasions. And looking back, like it wasn't really that nice of a Jeep. So he was real, you know, it takes a lot of courage for someone to let you learn how to drive manual on their car. And shout out Rylan for letting me drive his Jeep all the time, because that car that was so unforgiving, because it was a manual transmission and it barely made any torque. So if you weren't perfect with that clutch, it'd stall out immediately. It was very unforgiving. So that's kind of where I kind of perfected my manual driving. So at that time, Casey had an FJ Cruiser. Tristan had bought a Mazda RX-8 manual, the Rotary Gang, and then Cameron, another one of our buddies, you've seen him in a few of my videos at Cars and Coffee and stuff. He had his first S2000 back then, which was a black AP2 S2000. He had got it right after I got my Infiniti G35. So like in high school, I feel like that was a pretty cool lineup. And the craziest thing about all these cars was they were all like really close in races. I remember we had all of us, Tristan, Cameron, me, would always edge Casey out a little bit in his FJ Cruiser just because it weighed so much. But like my G35, Tristan's RX-8, and Cameron's S2000 were always really close whenever we raced. So that was like, that time was awesome because we were like racing everywhere, and we'd always like switch off on who won, allegedly racing everywhere, right? And like I'd win sometimes, Tristan would win sometimes, Cameron would win sometimes. Like for Tristan and Cameron, it was all about just hitting their shifts perfectly. And for me, it was just hoping that they'd mess up because their cars were a little bit lighter and I think a little bit faster at that time too. But that was like the most fun because we were redlining everywhere, but we our cars were too slow to like break any kind of crazy laws. Like we would just allegedly go out on these streets and just 3 honks and go. And at that time, we were also going to car meets. Car meets were huge at that time. They've kind of died off a little bit, or we've just gotten old and we don't go as much anymore. But I remember there was this car meet on Sunday nights in South Lake. For those of you guys that kind of know DFW, it's on top of this parking garage. And we'd go to those car meets every Sunday night. And that's kind of when like we started accelerating in our modifications, because we'd go one Sunday night and we'd be like, all right, dude, we got to pull up with a new mod next week. So we'd like put LED bulbs in and pull it to the car meet next week and be like, dude, check it out. Put LED bulbs in the interior. And so that was kind of where we were at, because we didn't really make enough money at the time to like do any crazy mods a week at a time. And I remember I had to save for the longest time to even be able to afford those coilovers or that exhaust or that intake, right? So we would save paycheck to paycheck. All we ate at that time was Taco Bell and Whataburger. That's all we ate. we would spend like $5 at Whataburger or like $4 at Taco Bell because we would save all the rest of our paycheck, which our paychecks were like $150 to $200 a week for car mods. And funny story as well, kind of as we go along with that. One time we were allegedly racing from Casey's house to Whataburger, which is about a 10-minute ride. And we got into this main road, and all three of us took off. And this freaking Karen pulls in behind us at Whataburger, and she's like, "Hey, my kids are in the car, and you guys are out here racing on the streets." And she got all mad at us. She yelled at us in the Whataburger parking lot. And like the crazy thing was, like, she wasn't even on the road. She was waiting to turn onto the road that we were like going down. So like she wasn't involved in it anyway. She wasn't even allegedly involved in this race in any way. Anyway, she pulled up to us and she yelled at us, and we're like, "Oh, whatever, dude." We just went inside and ate our Whataburger. And then later we found a Facebook post on like, it was like a buy sell trade post for like the local city that we live in, and it was like, "These irresponsible kids were on the street racing, and guess what? And all for what? They were on their way to Whataburger." That was like the funniest thing ever. He's like, "I cannot believe these kids were just racing just to get to Whataburger." But you know, for us, anytime we all got together, it was always on site on the streets, boy, I tell you what. So that was kind of high school, right? And I always think back to those times because you know, people would always tell you like, don't grow up too fast and enjoy those moments, because those really were like the extremely fun moments, because we didn't have enough money to do anything to really get ourselves in trouble or do anything stupid. It was just like us in our 250 horsepower car just racing each other everywhere, and it was always like neck and neck. So we were always like talking crap about who won the most recent race, or you know what your record was. Like, "Oh dude, I'm like 3-1 against your S2000, bro. You're only 2-1 against me," or whatever, right? So those were kind of like the times, right? And then after high school, college started. I've kept this same friend group even to now, like all through college and everything, right? So everyone started working, you know, better jobs as we got older. I started working at Discount Tire, was making a bit more money. I had a tire hookup at the time. I remember starting at Discount Tire, like the starting pay was higher than like the 3.5 years of raises that I got at Albertsons. Like I left Albertsons as like a front end supervisor, and I started at Discount Tire as like just a regular technician in the back changing tires. I was making more money than I was as a front end supervisor at Albertsons. But anyways, so I started working at Discount Tire. Casey started working with his uncle. Tristan started kind of flipping cars, and so everyone started getting a bit more money. And Tristan's got some crazy stories too. I definitely got to get him on an episode. But like, that's when everyone started getting a little bit more money. Things got crazier. I remember Tristan had bought a C6 Z06, which, holy crap, that was like the fastest car that any one of us could have ever touched at the time. Like, I remember, dude, that car was insane. Dropped a valve, but Tristan had a warranty, replaced it. That's another crazy story that I'll have him tell one day. But he had bought a C6Z, and that was like, dude, like nobody had ever even heard of a car that, you know, could have 500 horsepower at that time, right? So just a stock C6Z, but that thing was so fast. Like, I remember he was 19 when he got it, and it was like the craziest thing for him to have. But he did real well with flipping cars and making money that he was able to afford it. So good on him. And then Casey at the time had also got a 335i. It was an N54 BMW 335i that he like tuned on E85. So I mean, that thing had to have been making like 450 wheel, which the 335i is another crazy story of a car that blew up. I gotta have Casey tell that story one day too. And then I was making more money, but I couldn't afford anything that could keep up with those guys. So that's kind of the time when I had bought my Yamaha R6. I had a 2007 R6S, so it was like an S, so it was like the older kind of generation, but it was like a newer year model, if that makes sense. So I remember we'd race like the 335i, the C6Z, and my bike, and like me and Tristan were always like neck and neck. Like, I only had the motorcycle for like 8 months, and like thank God I did, because I allegedly did some crazy stuff on that thing, and it's a good thing I got rid of it. And my parents hated me having that thing, but that was kind of like where we were at the time. I also had like a Miata for a short period of time. It was an NB Miata, and that was the car that I got this was all while I still had my Infiniti. The Miata was kind of a way for me to perfect my manual driving skills, and it was a rear-wheel drive car, so it was really fun. I actually really enjoyed that car. But unfortunately, I only had it for a short period of time because I bought it for like $2,300 and I listed it for $4,000 and it sold. So I was like, dude, I can't turn down the money. I'm, making almost double what I bought it for. So I sold it. So that was kind of, that was kind of the car I really learned how to drive manual on and really perfected my skill. And so I sold that car, and then I sold my bike at the time too because it was kind of time to make my move to the next step. And I was always thinking like, what could I trade my G35 in for that would be faster, more fun? It definitely had to be manual. It definitely had to be rear wheel drive because I was just tired of the all wheel drive life. Because just to me, it just wasn't any fun. You couldn't really get the back end to kick out at all. You couldn't really get to spin tires or whatever. So, started thinking about what I wanted to get next. And Tristan's Corvette played a huge like role in my influence for what I kind of wanted. He had a C6 Z06, and I was like, dude, I don't have that much money. Like, there's no way I could afford that. But what about like a C5 Z06? And there was a period of time Tristan told me like, yeah, they like made a previous generation of this. I didn't even know a C5 Z06 existed until I got to college, but I thought they were all just like C5s. I didn't know the different models or anything. So I started looking at C5Zs, and they were kind of in like at that time you could get a really clean like low mileage C5Z for like around $20,000 to $21,000, which is kind of crazy. They haven't really depreciated much. But I was like, okay, and I started doing calculations in my head of like the payments that would be. I was like, I could trade my car in plus the money that I had. I could put down, and I had like 15K to like put down through all of that. Because at that time I had sold my motorcycle and I had sold my Miata, and I had my G35. So the G35 would have been the trade-in, and then I would take all the extra cash that I made from those cars, and buy a C5Z. So I was kind of looking in that $25,000 range. I started looking a lot. I definitely wanted something. I wanted LS. LS was like my top priority. I wanted a V8 that I could put an exhaust on because I was just kind of tired with the V6s. I wanted something that sound really loud, sound really cool. I wanted it to be rear wheel drive, and I wanted it to be manual. So that's kind of how I led to this Z06, which the story of how I got the Z06 is also crazy. Is another reason I want to get into like dealerships and like slimy dealership stories. But yeah, so I started looking around. I remember I looked at a few that were kind of in that $20,000-ish range, like 19 to 20. I started thinking about like financing potentially, but I didn't realize how hard it was to get a bank to give you a loan on a car that was that old. And like my parents didn't want me to get it, and so they were like, no, we're not going to help you buy it. Like if you want it, you're going to have to go get that yourself. So didn't really have an option to have them as a co-signer. So for me, it was going to be really hard being like a 19 or being like a 20-year-old trying to get that car. So that's kind of where I was at, right? So I remember looking at this one car, and dude, honestly, like thank God I didn't buy it from that dealership. And I went through hell at that dealership, and I was this close to signing the paperwork. In fact, I had put insurance on the car already, and then like they were closing, and they showed me the paperwork, and it was like a 27% interest rate that they thought they wouldn't tell me about. They're like, oh dude, we got you approved. I was like, no way, I'm coming up there to buy the car right now. And then like when I got there, I finally realized what the interest rate was because they didn't tell me, and I backed out of that deal at the very last second. And I had to like, this is a whole crazy story, but long story short, on that part, I got my cashier's check back. And right when that happened, the car that I have now popped up at dealership in Dallas, a Chevy dealership. There weren't even pictures of it at the time when I saw it, but I was able to catch it real early, and it was that electron blue, which was kind of like my dream color that I wanted. And so called a dealership, talked to the guy. He's like, yeah, we got it. It's a higher mileage car. We're going to sell it as is. And so I remember going up there the next day to check it out. I took all my money with me, had my Infinity. I took it up there, and I saw the car. It was in decent shape, honestly. Like the thing that attracted me to the most to it, because it was a high mileage car. It had 130,000 miles on it, which was way more miles than what I wanted. After the Infinity, I was like, I don't want to buy anything with over 100,000 miles. That's why I was kind of looking at payments on a C5Z. But I remember going there. It was a one-owner car, and so that right there told me someone's had this car for that long, and so they had taken really good care of it. So that's kind of why I took the leap of faith on it, and bought the car. And then that way, with that car, I could buy it outright and I wouldn't have to make any payments on it. So kind of my logic was, if I don't have to make payments on it, I can kind of spend all that money on modifications, right? So that's kind of where I was at. I think we're almost at an hour now, but I'm trying to finish this up. So I went the next day. I traded in my G35. They gave me $4,000 for it, and I think I paid another like $10,000 on top, $10,500 on top. So I ended up buying it for like $14,500 or $15,000, and it had 130,000 miles on it. It was a 2003 Z06, obviously electron blue, my favorite color, 6-speed manual. And the craziest thing, like, I know now, obviously it's one of the like the telltale signs, but like there was like a belt squeal that was going on, and I was like, the belt's squealing a little bit. He's like, yeah, and all the salesman said was, oh yeah, it just happens with cars that get these old. It's like, it's as is, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you. But it was clean title and single owner. I was like, all right, whatever. Hopefully it's just like the belt that needs to be changed. So I bought the car, and I drove it home, and then I later found out that the harmonic balancer on that car was wobbling, and that's why the belts were squealing. So that was one of the first things I had to replace on it, was the harmonic balancer. But anyways, I've had that car since then. I bought the car in 2016, so I'm going on 6 years of ownership. So that car, definitely still have it to this day. Super fun. I've dumped a lot of money into that car as well. So I could do a whole episode on just the Z06, man. That truly is like one of the most influential cars in my life, right? It's the whole reason I started this YouTube channel. So the C5Z, y'all know the story on that thing. I dailied that thing for 2 years through college. And then when like I finally lowered it and stuff, and I was like, it's getting kind of impractical. And then like my buddy at Discount Tire, he had this old Cavalier that he was trying to get rid of, and so I bought that off of him for $700. So for about two to 3 years, I dailied the Corvette in college until I bought that Cavalier, which I bought for $700. I made a video about that too, so y'all know the whole story on the Cavalier. But that became the daily. But the Corvette was an awesome daily for when I had it, right? Honestly, the C5Z would just long tubes, intake, tune, lowered a little bit, shifter, amazing car, amazing daily. I always recommend it to people who are like, yo, can I daily a C5Z? I'm like, yeah, dude, absolutely. I did it for 2.5 years. It was awesome. Through the rain, whatever. And then fast forwarding to kind of where we are now, I graduated in December of 2018, and then in September of 2019, I was working my big boy job for a little bit, and I got the Cadillac CTS-V, which y'all know that car. I've got plenty of videos on that, and I even have a story about how I got that car. So that brings us to where we're at today, and that's kind of how I got into cars. I feel like I went over so many different things, but as you guys can tell, like, you really are a product of your environment. Like, I've been influenced a lot my whole life by my friends, my core friend group, Tristan, Casey, Cameron, Rylan, Andrew, Kyle. These boys have been with me since literally elementary school, and that's kind of where my love for cars came from. And I was able to grow that whole passion of cars with my passion for photography and videography. And so that's kind of how the whole, how this channel came to be. Because we're always into tech, we're always into cameras, and we just never really didn't have so much to film. So I was like, yo, when I had the G35, I wanted to start the YouTube channel, but I was like, it'd be really awesome. I have some old videos of the G35, but I was like, the next car I get, I'm going to make a video on everything I do to it. I'm going to try to review it. At that time, That Dude in Blue was getting real big. There was a bunch of other bigger YouTube channels, Street Speed 717, 1320 Video. So it's like, it'd be cool to try to like start a vlog, because I could use my cameras and not just spend so much money on this stuff, actually use it. And so that's kind of how the inception of the YouTube channel, that's the story of how I started the YouTube channel, and this is the story of how I got into cars. And so, I have a bunch of other crazy stories about car meets and car dealerships and crazy things that we've done, motorcycle stories as well, but I want to definitely get into those on later episodes. But this is kind of just the beginning, just getting into the podcast. So as I had mentioned before, guys, I want to make it interactive. I definitely want to include segments talking about video submissions that you guys have. So again, send in your questions via video, via voice, like a voice note, or just like type out an email and send it to jamals.garage@gmail.com. I'll pop it up on the screen again. jamals.garage@gmail.com. Send in your questions, send in your comments, whatever you want to do, send them in, and I'll kind of play them on the podcast, and we'll react to them, answer your questions, or just kind of talk about the things that you bring up. So anyways, it's been episode 1 of Drivin and Survivin, the new podcast here on the channel. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for those of you guys that have stuck around this long. And anyways, I'll see you on the next episode. Peace.